Hello, good morning everybody. Welcome to this breakout session 3 in the context of this workshop on rural electrification. My name is Thorsten Everbeck. I work in the European Commission in the unit Director General for Development Cooperation in the unit C3, which works with specific financial instruments. And I'm here with my colleague Jan Riksen from the EDFIS, co-chairing this session.
Yeah, my name is Jan Riksen. I'm the director of EDFI, which is the Association of the European Development Finance Institutions working in the private sector, a grouping of 15 European institutions. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. I think you had already, and we had already very fruitful discussions and exchanges yesterday. And today the idea is to continue this. And in this breakout session, we have a couple of very interesting panelists with us, who I will briefly introduce to you. First, we have Mark Böting, who is an expert from FMO. He has been 25 years in banking and 20 years in emerging markets, of which he worked 10 years in Africa. He has been heavily involved in drafting the Electrify initiative, and he will also start later on the presentations. Then next to me there's Paul Berthaud, who holds a master's degree in global change management and works since 2012 at the René Lemon Institute in Berlin, in Germany. He's part of an off-grid research team which studies the potential of decentralized renewable-based systems. In the past, the research focused mainly on technical aspects of decentralized energy supply for rural electrification. And this is recently ever more moving to financial aspects, as this is regarded as the largest obstacle for the further development of renewable energy technologies. Welcome, Paul. Then we have Alexander Kossoy from the World Bank. He's a senior financial specialist, which is not, maybe you can raise your hand, then yeah, it's clear who is Alexander, at the Carbon and Climate Finance Unit. Alexander is a team leader of the World Bank flagship report on carbon pricing over the past 5 years. He has represented the World Bank in international fora and events since 2010 to officially launch these reports. In addition, he oversees many financial activities within the unit and has been actively involved in several financial instruments to climate finance. Before joining the World Bank, Alexander was in the private sector working in a variety of positions for international organizations such as Monsanto, PepsiCo and Rabobank. Alexander holds a bachelor degree in agricultural engineering from the University of Sao Paulo and a master degree in environmental engineering science from the Israel Institute of Technology. Welcome, Alexander. Then I would like to welcome Dan Reddick. Dan Reddick is also from the World Bank. He's a senior carbon finance specialist, and he manages several carbon funds in the World Bank, including the Carbon Initiative for Development and the Biocarbon Fund. Before joining the Carbon Finance Unit in 2006, Dan worked in the World Bank's Africa region on trades and tariffs. Dan started his career as an engineer working for an energy service company and later advised utilities on demand-side management programs. He holds a master's degree from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Massachusetts. Welcome, Dan. Finally, we have also Eugene Howard from the European Investment Bank. Eugene is an energy economist working for 20 years in energy finance. He has, in the recent years, very much developed a focus on renewable energy and energy efficiency, and he has been involved in all the Sustainable Energy for All initiatives of the EIB during the last years. Welcome, Eugene. So what we'll do now is we have different presentations from the different panelists, which we go through. And the idea is that after each presentation, we allow you to step in if you have specific questions of understanding on the presentations. And when we be done with the presentations, what we want to do now then is afterwards to have a discussion with you on these modalities of the Electrify and have an exchange and see also which ideas you might have in order to move forward this initiative. So with this being said, I'd like to pass the floor to Mark with the first presentation. Please, Mark.
Thank you. Good morning to you all. Maybe my presentation can be put back on the screen. Thank you. I touched upon the pros and cons yesterday a little bit already. I'm using the same presentation, so I have to search for the sheet. Meanwhile, I am with FMO, the Dutch Development Bank. We've been lucky having a Dutch government willing to support these type of initiatives at a very early stage. So we've been able to experiment with grants since 2003, 2004. And we made mistakes, but we learned as well. The biggest mistake, as I mentioned yesterday, which we probably made, is the willingness to enter transactions very early. We put ourselves on the screen as being an entrepreneurial development bank. But the early grants made available were done by having them convert into equity, which we've learned that several cases wasn't a very good idea. I've been involved myself personally since 2005, what I believe has been the largest rural electrification project so far in Tanzania, Mtwara region, using natural gas in the south of Tanzania to feed into a rural network. And we learned by making grants available, converting into equity, we would face, and we did face, capital calls, obviously. Companies growing, scaling, and every time we needed to decide, and sometimes 2 times a year, whether or not we would also like then to honor the capital calls, and therefore, in the end, after 2-3 years, you'll end up as a development bank with quite an equity position, or at least you're sort of forced to convert at a stage you may not have wanted it yourself. So the facility proposed to the Commission is not having that drawdown. It's a facility aimed at providing very early risk capital and not converting into equity, but instead in subordinated debt. And having therewith a specific class, asset class in the funding of a project or a corporate, which can have its own terms, which is to the Commission very important. Would you have equity? It's very difficult to put certain conditions to the equity which are different than the other equity holders. If the developer gets a premium, negotiates a premium with the debt providers of 100%, for example, very difficult to convert into equity a grant and not getting the same 100%. So you're not at a level playing field with the other equity providers. Therefore, with providing a subordinated debt facility, it can have its own terms and conditions and will not have the drawdown after drawbacks of having a direct equity position. And that's also what you've seen yesterday in my presentation. The European Commission is willing to make that convertible grant mechanism as flexible as possible. If not needed, the project is not feasible, it simply stays a grant. It does not need to be repaid. If the project is feasible, but less feasible than anticipated, only partly the grant may convert. If the project is feasible but needs help otherwise, the interest may be concessional, maybe even zero. The repayment can be scheduled as being a bullet after 20 years, etc. So it's really meant to be as flexible as possible, and a different asset class next to the other type of financings. A project probably will attract senior debt and the equity. So from a perspective of the Commission, the pros and cons are very favored towards the pros. The European Commission is having a very flexible instrument, can enter projects very early, is having much less of a monitoring issue. It does not have to take board positions, it does not have to value, does not need to enter into shareholders agreements and cooperation and business development agreements at an early stage. So it's very flexible for the Commission. The cons, the difficulties probably, as mentioned yesterday as well, relate to getting secure debt funding, but that is an issue to be solved prior to launching the facility. From a user perspective, the developer, a company, the advantages are very clear. You'll get a partner at a very early stage. It's actually risk capital, it's equity. The partner is a silent partner. If you determine the convertibility rights, the milestones properly, it should not harm the way you envision the project going forward or the corporate going forward. And you'll have, well, a very good partner which you can sell as well in attracting other type of equity or funding to the project. That's in a nutshell what I believe is the pros and cons of this new facility. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. I think you pointed out some very interesting and important issues. Is there in the audience whatever specific question on Mark's presentation which we should clarify immediately? Yes, please. Do we have microphones for the colleagues in the audience? So I saw one question there, and there was another one there. Yes, please.
Yes, good morning. I think a question we all need a little clarity on is Mark used the term quite often, very early. And for many of us who have been in the field, very early can denote different things about the development cycle. And I think it would be very helpful to, as the dialogue goes on, to understand how this intervention relates to completion of feasibility studies, the completion of market studies, the actual structuring of the project. There was reference in the working document to, and this was mentioned yesterday, to having a letter of intent from a senior lender and to having all permits and licenses in hand. That's not very early. So I think it would just be very helpful to understand where this actually gets introduced into the development cycle.
Thank you. Maybe we immediately take the second question, and maybe you could briefly also introduce yourself that we know to whom we talk. Yes, please.
Sorry, Mike Ratwick from Raffaele Energy. My question is to Mark again. It's pretty simple. A lot of these facilities have got a standard life, and say, for instance, this facility had a life of 5 years, and you talk of a 20-year bullet payment. What practically are you thinking in the way of the life of this facility?
Any more question? Yes, please.
Good morning, Tim Kaiser, European Commission, DG ECFIN. With regard to the table that you were just showing, I have to apologize that I missed the presentation yesterday, but I do have two questions with regard to the yield and the complexity that you noted. So a lower complexity than the products you compared to, and a high yield. Wonder whether you wouldn't mind explaining those two aspects, please. Thanks.
I think, Mark, then you can go ahead.
Okay. No, it's the facility is being designed. That having said, there are some lessons learned in the draft facility you received. So at this moment, there is no agreement. There are talks with senior debt providers, possible senior debt providers. But the biggest obstacle to success of such a type of facility as presented is a loose link to the senior debt. Senior debt should be there, and that's coming from the experience we have with several grants in the past, and then we needed to follow capital calls, and the senior debt kept on dragging, etc. And then in the end, if the senior debt is not there, the reputational risk and the money lost, well, is substantial. So yes, there may be a letter of interest put in the facility, but it is to safeguard that whomever and whatever and how this facility will be moved forward, it will have senior debt included in it. That's what it needs to do. That wording, the LOI. But it is meant to be a very early stage, and not necessarily by transferring the monies. As you've seen yesterday, there's a center of excellence to be associated. Actually, the manager of the facility should be the center of excellence, and so the anticipation is that the early stage contribution is maybe not a grant wired to an account, but is made available through a financial model or the template on the business plan, or some help in how licenses are obtained in a specific situation. You know, so the in-kind contribution is probably as important as the money flow itself. There is an investment period, but that's more politically, I guess, foreseen by the European Commission of 5 years. The manager will monitor whatever is being invested for the term of probably 20 or 25 years. So these are two different things. On the one side, there's an investment facility. On the other side, there's a management facility. I'm not sure. I don't have the sheet in front of me on the yield question. But generally speaking, if a facility would convert into equity, you will need to have the anticipated equity yield to follow. If it converts into a grant, you can decide yourself whatever yield you would like to have. As a starting point, a rule of thumb, subordinated debt generally is priced at 2/3 of an equity return. But in specific, this facility will not have required returns associated with it. I hope that answers the questions. Oh, the complexity. Yeah, that's also related to the senior debt availability. Complexity of making a convertible grant available is very low. It can be a document of 3 or 4 pages. That's at least what we do at the moment at FMO. Milestones are pretty easy to determine. Soon you have a business plan. The complexity to step in a project with only a convertible grant is very, very low. Any other instrument, you cannot step into a project without the contractual arrangements of the other parties. So you cannot enter into a convertible equity if you don't have as well the shareholders agreement, if you don't have the link to debt. Actually, you wouldn't like to invest equity if that is not approved already. So it's far more complex. There are far more players to the table. The legal process is far more complex. But the convertible grant as such is rather incomplex.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I mean, certainly we have later on still the possibility to come back to more specific questions. Then I would like to give Mark a little break because he will come back later and also said that he could tell us something about the legal aspects. But now I would like to ask Paul to continue the session with a presentation on the linking financial engineering to energy system planning. Please, Paul, the floor is yours.
All right. Okay, so thank you for the kind introduction. Welcome, everybody. Before I start, I would like to express that my institute, the Rainer Le Mans Institute, and I myself are very glad and proud to be a part of this workshop and are able or have the opportunity to present parts of our research work here today on how to link financial energy engineering with energy system modeling. So now I would need my slides, if possible. Thank you very much. Let me give you a brief introduction to my institute. We are a non-for-profit research institute founded in 2010, and we are based in Berlin, Germany, and have a permanent staff of about 25 researchers. And as many others, we are a member of the Alliance for Rural Electrification as well. In our institute, we are not only dealing with rural electrification, so our researchers are studying quite some different topics, but within the renewable off-grid systems group, this is where I am located, we are mainly focusing on off-grid technologies and rural electrification. The overall aim of our institute is to contribute with our research to an energy transition towards 100% renewables. So what is the problem that we are facing? We have intensively spoken about this yesterday. The electricity access shares remain low, although much effort is undertaken. There are quite some initiatives in place. This is once again illustrated here in this figure for the African continent. However, the availability of renewable resources and technologies has been extensively demonstrated in the scientific literature, but the deployment remains slow due to the low contribution from the private financing sector, and the problem is the bankability of the rural electrification projects. And when assessing the bankability of these problems, we really find ourselves in kind of a cosmos of uncertainties. So there are a lot of uncertainties about resources, the availability and seasonality of renewables, about uncertainties about the investment costs and the performance of a renewable-based system, or cost of necessary fuel when we are considering a hybrid mini-grid. On the financial side, it is difficult to come up with the cash flows over the entire project period and to assess whether the project has a good liquidity or if it needs some additional capital at a certain point in its project lifetime. And last but not least, we have the social pillar. So there are uncertainties about the acceptance of the technologies and about the willingness to pay. So finally, this results in high financing costs. This is illustrated in this graph, which originates from the Joint Research Center. It simply shows that capital costs here in red are increasing, of course, with interest rates. And finally, in the bubble here on the right, we see that the capital costs make up an overwhelming part of the power generation costs. So how to address these problems? In the past, we have developed tools in the Institute to address each sector of these problems, and what we are working on now is to combine all these tools in, let's say, one more holistic risk mitigation tool, which we call the Comprehensive Assessment of Rural Electrification Projects. And this tool is based on 4 main pillars, which is the geographic information system analysis, the energy system modeling pillar, the financial assessment, and finally sensitivity analysis. And what I would like to do now is to go briefly through each of these pillars. So when we are assessing a project, we are starting with a GIS-based analysis. So this allows us to assess the availability and seasonality of renewable resources in a high timely resolution over a longer period of up to 20 years, so that we can reflect changes in years in the performance of the system. We can perform demand studies based on population data and GDP data, and of course we are analyzing the existing energy infrastructure in order to give an indication if the main grid is most likely to reach a certain point in the near future, which would again threat the bankability of our off-grid project. This is then topped by the energy system modeling. In this pillar, we are basically simulating any energy system which is comprised of renewable and conventional resources. And this is necessary in order to study the performance of an energy system in a certain location and to derive important input parameters for the next assessment step, which is then the financial assessment. And here we are on the one side calculating the levelized cost of electricity, so the power generation costs based on the investment necessary and based on the performance of the particular system. And we can project the cash flows over the entire project period. And then we can see what happens to the bankability if a certain reinvestment is necessary, or if there are changes in the consumption of diesel fuel, for example. And what is further possible is to assess different financial implementation pathways and study the effect of these pathways on the financial performance of the project. Finally, we conduct a sensitivity analysis, and here it is possible to study the effect of each input parameter on the overall project performance, or on another certain input parameter or resulting parameter like the IRR or the LCOE or another important parameter. So the results of the sensitivity analysis are then feedbacked to the previous steps, and this is illustrated here. So the advantage of this approach is that each of the tools are combined in one approach, and that the results are feedback to the previous pillars and are then readjusted. So for example, if we see in the sensitivity analysis that capital expenditures for PV have a great influence on the LCOEs, for example, we can then change again this parameter in the second pillar in the energy system modeling and come up with more robust results for the rural electrification project, and do this as long as we are really certain about the final results of our assessment. So let's set this in the framework of this instrument that we are discussing here in this workshop. What could we deliver for the further success of the instrument? For the European Commission, We could, for example, with this tool estimate what is the maximal possible interest rate from the debt that could be extracted from the project without compromising it. And we could assess the liquidity so that we see if the cash flow is in risk of falling under zero at a certain point of the project lifetime. For the private financing institutions, we could provide them with our risk evaluation and with the gained data from our sensitivity analysis so that they can perform, based on this data, their internal in-house sensitivity analysis. For the shareholders and the project developers in the countries, we can guide them how to apply Electrify, but further provide them with the results from our technical analysis, so we can guide them which energy system to be to build, which is most likely to perform optimally in their location. And of course, we can evaluate the effects of Electrify on the overall profitableness of the project and draw out different financial implementation strategies for the rural electrification projects. So to come to an end, what we would like to contribute to the success of Electrify is to showcase the leverage effect, to provide guidance for project developers in applying the instrument, and further it is even thinkable that the tool is used for due diligence of project submissions. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Will we stay here?
Maybe, yeah, you can stay there. Thanks very much, Paul, for the interesting presentation. Also here, we'd like to give you the opportunity to ask specific questions, if you have any. Yes, please. In the back.
Yes, my name is Pascal Abbé from the Technical Assistance Facility. I would like to come back to the major theme of this breakout session, implementation modality of Electrify. I have two questions. The first one is, what is the capacity of the junior debt, which is taken as a quasi-equity? What is the capacity, the expectation of the junior debt to create, to raise additional senior debt? Is that an effect you are looking for? The second question is, it sounds like this product, Electrify, is more targeted to new company, or what we call special purpose vehicle company, to raise finance for, in the case of a feed-in tariff application, for example. Is Electrify applicable to an existing company for balance sheet finance? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's more a question to Mark than to Paul. And I'd like to remind you that the idea was that after the presentations, we have specific questions towards the presentations, and then we have a more general discussion and possibility for us to ask more general questions on the Electrify initiative after we have passed all presentations. But now I think, Mark, maybe you want to reply quickly to the questions raised?
Yeah, that was in my presentation yesterday. There will be a focus on corporates as well. But the statistics show that roughly 80%, I believe, from investments in this area is being done through projects. But nevertheless, the facility is equally available for corporates, apart from probably then convertible grants, more direct subordinated or junior debt positions will be taken.
Thanks, Mark. Are there any specific questions to Paul regarding his presentation at this stage? If that's not the case, then I'd like to give the floor to Alexander and Dan for their presentation.
Hello. I think the slides, should I go? Okay, I can go there. afternoon. Thanks a lot for the invitation to speak, and I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. Now, before I start, I would just make a couple of points. One is that Dan and I, we represent a small part of the World Bank Group, and yesterday there were several programs and initiatives that were mentioned that the bank's involved, and our colleagues in the energy department are here. I understand they're quite keen to support the Commission in that in this initiative, and they probably have tools to do so. So let's just make sure. Now, part of this audience may not know the details of carbon finance and what it means. So we work in a climate and carbon finance unit of the bank, and I don't intend to explain carbon finance here. It would take much more than this 10 minutes. But pretty much, just to be very quick, a Kyoto Protocol was signed in 1987 and under the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, and one of the flexible mechanisms agreed in this protocol, and the one that concerns this initiative is called CDM, or Clean Development Mechanism. And basically, emissions can be reduced where they're cheap or least expensive, and then traded and then purchased by countries with emission reduction targets. And the objective, pretty much, of this protocol, the agenda was on climate, but it fits extremely well with this, with the energy access agenda as well, because it was meant to provide additional, the certificates provide additional revenues for the projects to cope with incremental costs, particularly the low carbon technologies. So just to give you a sense on how we stand on that, as of today, it's almost 8,000 projects in over 150 countries are actually reducing over 1.4 billion tons of CO2 equivalent, and bringing that into number, that most of them were purchased at a price over $10 per ton. So we are talking about maybe 15 to 20 billion dollars, not million, but billion dollars in additional low carbon investment to developing countries. And that's only the nominal value of the contracts. And we estimate that these contracts have channeled additional $130 billion in additional revenues to those projects in developing countries. So we are talking about a huge order of magnitude. Now, if I can see the, yeah, should be on me. There we go. Now, I went to just show two slides with real cases that we have in our portfolio. We manage several funds, and Dan Reddick is one of the managers, and he's going to come and explain a little bit of this main fund that could potentially have synergies with Electrify. But we have two cases that I think exemplify quite well the different roles that carbon credits can play in supporting underlying finance, and then it's very much in synergy with Electrify. The first case is a project called Plantar in Brazil, and just pretty much the project was comprised of planting eucalyptus forests, then harvesting them after 7 years, producing, carbonizing them to produce charcoal, and use the charcoal to produce pig iron, replacing the traditional mineral iron in the steel industry. So in other words, for the lender's perspective, this project was a project finance, or this project would require project finance of 7 years bullet, because there was absolutely no revenues until the pig iron was produced in year 7. So in other words, 7 years of grace period, full amortization on year 7. Well, for many small enterprises in developing countries, this was absolutely no-go. All right, the risks from the lender's perspective, and just for you to understand, I was not at the World Bank at the time, I was in Rabobank, so I was a potential lender for this project. And when I was looking at this project, my main risks were, well, the structure itself, obviously the pig iron sectoral risk, the borrower's ability to produce, to perform and actually repay my loan if I would provide a loan, and probably the no-go or the deal breaker in this deal was the sovereign risk, which included confiscation, expropriation, nationalization involved in a 7 years bullet loan that would make me as a lender have to purchase a guarantee, sovereign risk guarantee, that would be so expensive that probably would make the deal not viable either for me as a lender or for the client, because they would have to pay this enormous coupon to compensate that. Well, then comes carbon credits generating first annual revenues from years 1 to 6. So now the loan could be amortized at annual basis. No longer, so this would not be a bullet loan anymore. The revenues provided by carbon credits are in hard currency, and that was extremely important for Rabobank because the loan would be given in hard currency as well, and the company was susceptible to the currency, the local currency devaluation risk, and this was full carbon credits are provided always in hard currency by buyers either in Europe, Japan, or United States. The revenues normally come from AAA buyers or at least very credit-worthy buyers outside the host country. In that case, it was Brazil. And the payments were fully exempt from international or from any external interference. So the confiscation, expropriation were not a problem because the World Bank in that particular project agreed to purchase the credits regardless of any regulatory risk, any certification thing. The project generated the credits. In other words, the operation was going on. The World Bank would purchase the credits, and then Rabobank would see the project generating this additional revenues. So Rabobank, in that transaction that you see in the slide, would finance Plantar, just to be clear, in exchange for the pledge of the emission reductions purchase agreement between Plantar and the World Bank, and the World Bank would pay Rabobank directly for the carbon credits and amortizing the loan being given by Rabo to Plantar. And the financial structure was made that the annual debt service was structured to mirror exactly the delivery of carbon. So the entire amortization was made for the loan by the World Bank to Rabobank, just leaving Plantar to pay for the interest in that loan. In other words, the remaining risk for Rabobank, the lender, was only the credit risk, which was something the lenders are willing and capable to assume. And in this particular case, it was an unviable project turned into not just viable, but extremely attractive transaction that was fully reflected in the coupon. The interest rate on that loan was extremely low to Plantar. It was sub-market levels because this was considered a country risk-free transaction for Rabobank. Now, very short on a second example where it's a different case. This is a hydropower plant in Ecuador. And interestingly, in this particular, this was a $35 million project in terms of investment or capital expenditure, and carbon credits, the nominal value of carbon credits were a little more than 4 million. If you bring that to net present value, it was 2 million out of 35. And the incremental IRR coming from carbon was minimum. The project was already quite well in terms of IRR. It was over 15.5% without carbon and 16% with carbon fuel bullet base points only. But still, without carbon, this project never managed to be eligible to obtain finance because it never complied with the investment criteria for most of the banks that required a PPA for this project to be pledged to the loan in a project finance. In this, I should have mentioned that the company was not creditworthy sufficiently and didn't have guarantees, so the corporate finance in this case was not possible. It had to be a project finance. And the project never had a PPA to be pledged to the lenders. And then carbon credits came and the ERPA came, providing the same structure that I mentioned before. Revenues in hard currency pledged to the loan. And again, it made the project viable. So in this case, I just want to emphasize there was no quantitative impact of carbon, but a very strong qualitative impact of the carbon coming from the carbon revenues. I could continue on the other slides, but I think it's just the objective was give a small idea on the kind of revenues that carbon credits can provide in complement to the Electrify to support lenders to be interested in these projects. And with the same structure that I mentioned here, we would be willing to do with lenders that would be financing those projects under the Electrify. So let me pass that to Dan.
Thanks, Alex. Good morning, everyone. I manage a carbon fund, which is called the Carbon Initiative for Development, or otherwise known as CDEV. It's a $100 million carbon fund with a 25 million TA facility attached to it. And from my point of view, I would say, we look at Electrify as a very complementary fund. And as we are putting together our pipeline, we actually did an RFP 12 months ago, and we got around 200 different projects that were proposed. We've ended up with 15 projects at this point, about 10 of which are rural electrification projects. We can definitely see there's obvious funding gaps, and certainly we welcome Electrify in terms of helping to close that financing gap. You know, as Alex was discussing about carbon finance, or we actually use more of the results-based payments these days. That's our nom de jour. We view our mission beyond the impact and beyond our ability just to get credits for the donors to this fund, which include DFID and the Swedish Energy Agency and the Swiss Climate Sen Foundation. We view our mission to try to see how we can make carbon finance or results-based payments bankable. It doesn't actually have to be carbon finance. In case of cook stoves, there are also movements to monetize the health impacts from stoves, and I've also heard of water credits for projects that can improve access to water as well. So these are just revenue streams upon performance, and so it creates a very interesting opportunity to lower the risk for finance. And in fact, we're actually exploring with some financial intermediaries this exact model that Alex discussed, where we can sign the emission contract reduction agreement with this financial intermediary and help reduce their risk. So in fact, it allows them to provide even more finance. So it's just a way of leveraging the finance. We don't view what our facility does as it's a piece of the puzzle, but it can help in cases of this financial intermediary or perhaps Electrify in terms of reducing their risk and helping them to ensure returns. I guess that's it. If we're happy to take questions now.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks to both of you. I think it raised some interesting ideas, your presentation and your link to carbon finance. Are there any questions from your side in the audience on these presentations? Yes, please.
Sorry, Mike Ratwick from Raffaele Energy again. My question to Alex, you've put two examples up there. Both look very attractive as a means of giving comfort to a senior debt lender, as an example. Would any of these examples stand up or could these be replicated now in the light of today's carbon price?
In the case of our fund, I'll answer for Alex because our fund pays above market prices. So most of the funds that you see out there today are going to be funded through sovereigns who want to see, in the case of our fund, they're looking at creating business models, exploring where carbon finance or results-based payments can really make an impact. So the reason they're doing this is, with one, maybe an expectation that the market returns, and two, as a possible way to look at how to disperse ODA funds in a different way for climate finance.
There was one more question in the back, and then there's another one here in front.
Okay. Yeah. Hello. I just have a general question. Sanfali from the AfriSec group. And I just wanted to know if you provide any incentive for smaller companies to actually fill the gap in project financing.
We're not providing any kind of equity. I mean, our facility is very straightforward in a way. It's a carbon finance. It's payment upon performance. So that wouldn't be our fund specifically. Yeah.
Just compliment, but the same structure that we applies. In other words, if there is any lender interested in take the future revenues coming from carbon, we would be willing to pledge our contract to their finance to the projects. In other words, it could be the future revenues that naturally would be paid upon performance can be monetized and front-loaded, so the project developer can actually face the investment, the capital expenditure. This is exactly what's shown here in this graph. In this case was the Inter-American Development Bank paid upfront for the company for the investment, although the cash flow would naturally come later on.
Thanks. There's one more question here. Yes, please.
Mon nom c'est Ndiko Masabo Hermenegilde. Je suis du secteur privé du Burundi. Je suis, disons, un promoteur de projets d'électrification rurale basé sur les biomasses. Et je suis très intéressé par la question de financement parce que au niveau de la technologie, je crois que les choses évoluent très bien. Les technologies sont déjà éprouvées. Mais la plus grande question, c'est les modalités de financement, l'accès au financement pour la réalisation de ces projets. Et je suis très content, je suis très heureux d'apprendre que parmi les questions que se posaient les financiers, il se trouve la question de garantie souveraine qui vient d'être évoquée par M. Alexandre. Et je voudrais avoir un peu plus d'informations sur les possibilités, parce que la garantie souveraine de l'État, parfois, n'est pas facile à accorder à partir de certains États, compte tenu de leur structure. Donc, je voulais savoir comment la Banque mondiale, via les structures qui sont en place, peuvent, disons, résoudre la question de garantie souveraine demandée par certains établissements financiers actuellement. Je vous remercie.
I'm not sure I fully got the question. I mean, my French is basic.
Yeah, basically the question is that very often there's difficulties finding a sovereign guarantee. Yeah. So the question is what the World Bank could do in order to solve this issue and to help to finance the project later on.
Yeah, that's exactly what I explained in the beginning of this presentation. This is a small part of bank. Our mandate is to purchase carbon credits. The bank has one arm called MIGA, Multilateral Investment Guarantee, and they actually provide sovereign risk guarantees and insurances, but that's not up to us. We can, if the project requires an additional sovereign guarantee to get off the ground, we can talk to them and combine efforts. They provide the sovereign guarantee, we purchase the carbon credits, and this would eventually suffice for the commercial banks to come and finance the project. But it's not up to our department. We can help getting the pieces together, though.
Does, yeah, answer your question. There's one more question. Yes, please.
Yeah, hello. What stage you will be providing carbon finance, like at DPR stage or PPA stage, and what is the stage, and how do you provide, like carbon credits are like, it is a fluctuating, it's not the standard price you are going to pay for the carbon credits, and I don't know how you can provide a finance. Could you please explain?
You know, in our case, we are intending to sign fixed price ERPAs emission reduction purchase agreements, so the price won't fluctuate. It'd be a fixed price. So, does that answer your question? Yeah.
And again, not related to market. Market for emission reductions today would be at 15 cents per ton. And we're talking about the participants of the fund are interested in maintaining this infrastructure without being dismantled. In other words, so the projects, they want really the vulnerable projects that require emission reductions to remain operational and for new projects to be developed, so the prices were going to be completely out of market-based, and it's going to be agreed between the seller and the buyer to make the project viable, or to support the project to become viable.
Yeah, thanks very much. Then I would like to... Oh, there's one more. Yes, one more question.
Yes, good morning. Denis from ID in France. Just a simple question on the project size. Yesterday, from what I understood, you are targeting with Electrify small project, 1 to 5 million euro, if I'm correct. From what I saw, you in carbon finance are targeting much bigger projects. Do you think your modality can apply for small rural electrification projects? Thank you.
I think, we'll end up, so with 100 million US fund, we end up with probably around 10 to 15 projects. That gives you a rough estimate of the size of the revenue we can provide to these projects. For smaller projects, I mentioned that we are exploring with intermediaries because, I think, as you've heard, there's a lot of transaction costs in doing small projects. So really, the only way we can really efficiently do this is through intermediaries. But that is a possibility.
Yeah, thanks also for this. I think it was an interesting question and interesting answer. With this, I would like to hand over then and give the floor to Eugene, explaining to us the complementarity of this initiative with already ongoing programs under Sustainable Energy for All. Please, Eugene.
Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know the European Investment Bank very well, I'm from the European Investment Bank. It's the house bank for the European Union. The shareholders are the EU member states, and we're non-profit. We basically raise our capital on the markets and add a markup for our costs, and then pass the financing on to our borrowers at attractive rates, but not subsidized rates. We do have some access to subsidies and grants through the EU ITF, Infrastructure Trust Fund, and other bodies which do offer grants, which we can apply to, and we use them when we can to blend with our own financing to support projects. Okay. About 2 years ago, we sat down because of the bank was being asked to look into financing smaller projects, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, the bank is specialized in large-scale infrastructure projects. We've been financing projects in Africa and other parts of the world for many, many years. But to go access the smaller projects is a challenge for an institution like ours. So we sat down with with engineers who are very familiar with the technical assistance that are being provided, with finance officers who have experience in this area, economists, to put together to brainstorm to see where could the EIB move and create an operation, an instrument, which might facilitate smaller scale projects. We looked at a number of options. And clearly, the issues are many that are affecting the development of small-scale projects in Africa in particular. But it's true of small-scale projects anywhere, including rural electrification. Technical assistance needs are great, and in all levels and periods of the project development. They have difficulties getting sufficient equity for these projects. When they go to try to get senior debt, particularly from local finance institutions, the conditions of the project are not sufficient to meet the requirements of these banks. Then they would require large amounts of equity in order to be able to finance these projects. So we saw these problems as being faced by all of the smaller projects, but in particular, if we wanted to focus on sub-Saharan Africa, we thought, well, what could we do as a bank? Now, knowing where we have our resources and where our strengths are, we say, okay, we will focus on the financing. And how can we facilitate financing?
Excuse me, sir. Could you speak into the mic, please?
Sorry.
Because we can't hear you.
Yes, okay. Sorry about that. And so we say, how can we look into the financing of debt? How can we facilitate that? And we decided that one of the ways in which directly the bank would not be able to do this. We would need to have blending of grant financing and with our own financing to provide a service. So we thought, okay, one of the areas where we think we could provide a product is through subordinated debt. So if we could provide a subordinated debt product which would provide a cushion between the equity and the senior debt, that would be an area which would facilitate many projects which in principle are actually viable projects, but then cannot meet all of the requirements to get a financial close on their projects. So that was the first idea we had. And then we said, okay, well, we have to focus on smaller scale. Let's look at projects, say, below 15 megawatts as our principal target. And with this in mind, we put together we had a concept of having a platform, a debt platform, and that would be a debt fund, in fact, set in place using money from grant financing for C shares, which support subordinated debt. And then we said, okay, this debt platform, which could put in place, would of course require technical assistance to help it, because the costs of project finance in small scale is quite high. So a type of center of expertise would have to be set up, have to be financed separately for grant financing to be able to provide the TA required to make these projects viable. And so this concept was centered around provision of subordinated debt for smaller projects. And I think that that was the kernel of the discussion, how we thought we would be able to go forward. But then there was, I think, a further impetus, because we felt that in the end, just providing the debt is not enough. We would like to try to facilitate more than just debt provision. So we came up with the concept of the Renewable Energy Performance Platform, in which the debt platform would be part of it, but it is not the only part of it. And we thought, okay, then since what the other parts that we would like to cover, we didn't want to touch equity. Equity we are providing through direct lending to funds. We also participate in the Global Energy Efficiency Renewable Energy Fund, which is a fund of funds that was started by the Commission and other donors to make investments in equity in small-scale renewables around the world. So we thought that is their business. We'll allow them to continue to advance in that area. Instead, we'll focus on the debt side. And we thought the best way to move forward would be to look at what other problems that we could help support with this, and using grant money as technical assistance in order to do that. And what we found was, in addition to having difficulty obtaining sufficient debt or accessing subordinated debt in particular, well, there was the small-scale projects are facing all kinds of risks. There's political risks and regulatory risks. There are off-takers risks in which they have a PPA, but then the PPA off-taker is not seen as creditworthy enough for banks to rely on the PPA itself. currency risks. So all these other risks, which larger projects, by and large, can deal with. They have means of accessing the markets to mitigate these risks. Smaller projects just do not have the capacity, the know-how, and also the costs are quite high for such a thing. So we thought what we could do is put together what we would like is you could say is a structuring manager. It's a structuring platform, in fact, where they could go out and find where are the providers of risk mitigation instruments. So we have TCX and MIGA and other providers of risk mitigation instruments. They're in the market. They have products. But are these products adapted to small-scale projects? Are they not? And generally not. Can they be affordable? Can a small project access it? What we thought was we could put together a platform in which you may be able to standardize some of the type of risk mitigation products. Provide the information the risk mitigation product provider requires on projects. And see if we could negotiate with these other risk mitigation product providers for services which are generally not very easily available. We felt that with that would be one step forward to reducing the risks associated with the projects, lower the risks associated, allowing the project possibly to obtain financing more easily. Let me forward here. Okay. So the red area you can see that is our REP implementation vehicle. It is they will work with a number of players around them. You have the risk mitigation instruments which I mentioned earlier, TCX, OPIC. You could talk MIGA could be in there. AEGF is another facility that the EIB is working on to provide. It's basically Africa Energy Guarantee Fund. So it's another guarantee instrument which is being put. We're in the process of trying to establish this instrument. All of these providers of risk instruments could then work with REP to provide a product which is much more adapted to smaller scale projects. And that would be its first, the REP manager's first port of call, you could say. How can we identify risk mitigation instruments which could be provided to this particular project to reduce the costs of financing? Secondly, his next job is to try to assure a good supply of finance. So where can we get financing for the project? Can we obtain subordinated debt? Can we get other private sector financiers interested in this project to provide the type of debt finance which might be, I would say, our more subordinated type of debt finance to the project? And then third, before going to the commercial banks for senior lending, you still may have a gap. And I think this gap, number 3 on this on this slide, this gap is, I think, what Electrify is also trying to achieve, is identify the gap that still is needed in order to make a project a viable project for banking, reach a financial close, and then how best to provide money for this gap. So I think we talked about, I think the World Bank mentioned, they're talking about results-based financing. That's result-based financial support. That is the gap that we're talking about, how to close it. How to best provide grant money to close the gap. In some cases, it may be technical assistance. In some cases, you could talk about a top-up. You could talk about a top-up on top of a PPA, a top-up on top of a feed tariff. You might actually talk about investment grants, or in the case of Electrify, you would have a convertible grant. All these are possible, and I think that we do not, at this, when we establish REP, we didn't want to define exactly how number 3 will be done, because it depends on the country, the context, the project. And we wanted to give the REP manager sufficient leeway to be able to explore different possibilities of using REP financing. as you see here, his view is, his role, the rep manager's role is, first you make contacts, you develop pipelines, you do the due diligence for the projects, you are in charge of reporting. This is all stuff that will have to be required for your providers of subordinated debt, also possibly for your providers of risk mitigation instruments. And they will negotiate terms for these contracts for the projects. The idea ultimately is to try to use what is available in the market without replicating it, adapt it as much as best possible to the project, and reduce costs. I mean, I'm not sure if this is going to, yeah. Reduce cost so that when you come to the financing gap, it's smaller even before you have to put any grant money in at all. So, first point, see if we can use risk mitigation instruments. This example was set up for a small hydro project in Tanzania, where we had the numbers and we ran through the model to see, you know, how such instruments could be used. Let's see if I, oops, good. Then, secondly, they would go out to something like the GCPF or other debt providers, see if they can bring in sufficient debt to bring again the costs of the project or the financial close of the project to as close as possible to being achieved. And then, as a last point, is then how do we use grant money? And so in a sense, he has the rep manager has a double duty. One is to try to, of course, achieve as many projects as they can within the context of the rep program, so that meet the targets that have been set for the manager. But at the same time is to use the money efficiently. And what we're trying very hard here is to try to find a means in which we can use grant money more efficiently, and use it after all other means of achieving of reducing risks have been looked at first. Now, the REP proposal has already been endorsed by the Infrastructure Trust Fund's Project Finance Group. It went to the Executive Committee already twice, and the provisional approval has been given. We have been asked to make sure that there was rural electrification as one of the possibilities for the REP. Now, the REP was originally focusing, well, has always been focusing on mainly grid-connected electricity from renewable energies, 1 to 15 megawatts. Why? Mainly because this is where we felt that there's a good chance of finding projects that are almost ready, that are viable, that are very close to being financially closable, but lack something. And that this something is what REP is trying to then provide. We thought that would be the best markets to be able to deal with. In reality, though, when we look at the rural electrification or mini-grids, you have this ABC model, for example. That exists already, and in reality, that falls into the same category as small renewables. Because you may have, many cases, you will have renewables backing the mini-grids. And from the beginning, we had a pipeline which already included what would be considered 2 small projects, which are ABC-type models of rural electrification. In addition to that, we've gone back to we've gone through a selection process. We've selected a fund manager already. They have already, during their presentations, had already made quite a pitch to support additional small mini-grid projects. So in reality, we already have 4 projects, at least in our pipeline, that would qualify as a mini-grid projects, electrify type projects. And so therefore, we can come back to the ITF and the European Commission to confirm, in fact, that we do meet the requirements that they had. So we're at this moment, we will be waiting for an approval, but our fund manager is ready to go. We have our lined up. We have other donors who are interested in financing, because what REP will do is it focuses first on 9 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. It's been expanded to now 12 countries. there's no particular reason to exclude countries other than we want to focus on where projects can be achieved over a short period of time. So we're looking at over the next 3 years, of course, the markets that would be, you would consider more advanced markets where the opportunities are probably much closer to being achieved in terms of getting a project to bankability would be countries like Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda. Other countries where liberalization is in the process of being rolled out, countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Ethiopia, maybe Rwanda. And then you have another set of countries where I think we feel that their impacts could be great and there would be perhaps isolated opportunities for REP. Would be countries like Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, Mozambique, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire. So I think there is no particular reason to limit REP to any particular countries, and they will be open always to look at opportunities in different countries in Africa, but it is focused on sub-Saharan Africa. It is meant to support our debt platform, the GCPF. And I think that, like I said, we're at this point just waiting for a go-ahead, and then we could proceed with putting the rep manager in place by January next year to start working on projects. Now, original view was to finance something like 150 megawatts of small-scale projects in sub-Saharan Africa. If smaller projects like the grid, mini-grids come in to be a larger part of the portfolio, then of course the 150 megawatt target might be reduced, but the number of projects overall financed under this first stage of REP would be probably about 15 to 20 projects is what we're looking at. We're not looking to change the world. What we're looking to do is put some grease in the wheel, get projects that are close to being ready, closed financially, and get some progress on the ground. A very modest approach, but it's one that can be scaled. It's one that can be repeated. That can be topped up with a REP 2 or with more money in the future if it's successful. So I think it's an interesting, I would say it's an interesting pilot to see how well it can work. But I think that this pilot will achieve already on its own, I think, results that are worth mentioning. These other slides are basically information on how REP money would be used. In this one in particular, we have something like 4 million euro in technical assistance that will be part of the REP platform. And another possibly 26 million euro that will be grants money available to use for that 0.3 I said on the first slide, which will be closing the gaps. And how the grant money to be used is still going to be discussed with the rep manager. And I think that this is an important point, because now that we're talking about Electrify, I think it offers another tool, another way of using grant money, which could be attractive, could be incorporated into REP. It's unclear yet at this moment how REP will, be best complement the Electrify program. But I think the opportunities for complementarity are very, very high. Just to mention one other point, the EIB, in addition to REP itself, has a number of other initiatives which are supporting SE for All. So the top two, the REP and the GCPF, that is what I have just discussed with you now. The Africa Energy Guarantee Fund is a fund which will be probably targeting much larger projects in the energy sector. Again, it's going to provide guarantees which at the moment are still being found to be difficult for projects to obtain. The Africa Sustainable Energy Facility is a facility which we thought would be very attractive in working with local institutions, local finance institutions, providing technical assistance, and again, in a sense, structuring. Small project finance structuring services, in a sense, to make these projects viable. We're also directly financing now of two projects in which we have impact investment money available to the bank, where we can take a higher risk than would be normal, And they are projects that are very much looking at sort of smallest scale, renewable and rural electrification at domestic household level, residential level, and mini grids. Microfinance institutions, so looking at financing an association of microfinance institutions where they can help and provide a lot of TA with them as well to help provide the services that would make a rollout of electrification in the areas where those institutions are working possible, and also in financing directly into equity funds that are looking more at impact investment, which is really the lowest bottom of the pyramid consumers. And of course, our participation in the Global Energy Efficiency Renewable Energy Fund, GREF, has been ongoing. We've taken something like 40 million euro in investment, seed investment from donors. We're now finishing a private equity placement or fundraising to take it up to a total of close to, I think it's, well, we're looking for 112 million euro in private funding, which looks like it may close by this end of this year. So this initiative is actually very successful, but it is not really addressing the smallest rural electrification projects that we've been discussing in this forum. It's more, it does cover them as well and can, but its main focus is more on the smaller scale renewables, which are connected to the grid. But those are also very important in all of the countries. You know, if we want to get away from simply financing the largest of projects, these smaller projects are what help development of grids and support the stability of grids in rural areas. And I think that so it is a very big contribution to the purposes of SE for All. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eugene. I think it's a quite impressive number of initiatives which are already going on, and certainly we have to see also how we can use these initiatives to support the Electrify. And there's still, I guess, some work to do, how we can bring this together in order to achieve a successful start of Electrify. Do you have any specific questions you want to ask Eugene? Otherwise, looking at my watch, we have 20 more minutes for general discussion. So maybe we can also combine it. If you have specific questions, you can also raise it. And then if you have more general questions on the Electrify initiative, it's now also the time. Please.
Thank you. I'm Balthasar Klimby from the Alliance for Rural Electrification. And I've got a question. When you were talking about the REP, for a moment I was confused because I thought you were talking about Electrify, because it seems quite a lot. And I was wondering if you could tell something about what you think Electrify has to offer, what REP does not have yet.
Well, I think the details on Electrify are still not worked out. You know, we've seen the paper that was presented yesterday. The bank has seen the same paper. I think the concept is there. Listening to what the discussions were yesterday, I think that there were a number of points that were raised. One, technical assistance is still very much required in many stages of the project development. That's being presumably addressed by the Center of Excellence, and I presume that that's exactly what the concept for the Center of Excellence will be, is to also be able to provide the required technical assistance. But I think that one instrument on its own is really never a magic bullet. It just isn't. There's too many projects that have different problems. And I think that that is, I think, what, at least in terms of REP, we try to address. We want a structuring manager in place. And we want them to look at all the project financing to make sure the closing. And then using the right instrument like Electrify, which I think can be very valuable and a very valuable contribution to rural electrification. It is an instrument, and I think that the key point is then being able to use that instrument, but in combination with other instruments to close the project finance. And I think that That aspect of Electrify has not been elaborated and will need to be, I think. And there will be, and I think that is one of the areas where there needs to be a little more work on. There's also there's a number of risks associated or complexities associated with convertible grants, which hasn't yet really been addressed. But I think you get some lawyers in the room, and then they will begin to flesh out the structure itself of Electrify. May have to be defined partly on how the revenues coming back from these convertible grants, the vehicles, the legal vehicles in which this takes place, whether it's a centralized process, under one fund manager. One of the things we see with REP, and the reason why we're only sticking at this time for Sub-Saharan Africa, is that we feel that there's a lot of need for local presence there. Our REP managers have local offices throughout. They're based in Africa. So I think that that is an area that if you want to roll out Electrify around the world, I think that there's going to be a very strong component of regionalness in Electrify in order to really achieve its goals. And that also has to be elaborated. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add on this, I think one specific issue is that in the Electrify initiative, we have this financing, and Mark want to maybe step in here, of subordinated debt, specific financing of this part of the overall financing structure, and this is not really the focus of the REP. So this is also something, as Eugene pointed out in his presentation, where you certainly can see that there's a missing gap. Yes, please, Cindy. Maybe first in the back, and then we start in front, and then we pass to you.
Thank you. My name is Chonai Aung from Myanmar, Asian country, and we are specialized in the renewable energy and energy efficiency, and also the manufacturer of the renewable energy product like a biomass gasifier, biogas, and micro hydropowers. I very much appreciate for your presentation. So, Eugene, when we start know about the REP aims and how, but we found out that your geographic is only sub-Saharan Africa. Is it any program to our Asian country like Myanmar? So in this REP program, but I found out another presentation at the end. You have another program of the Global Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Fund. This is the GREF. So with this context, how we could join with you in this renewable energy project. Thank you.
Maybe we gather like 2 or 3 questions and then we can answer together. So in the back now, please.
Hello, good morning. My name is Peter Edelman. I'm professor in the university in Germany, and I'm director of the Institute for Decentralized Electrification. I'm now since more than 30 years in the field of photovoltaics and rural electrification. And my history is mainly from the private sector. So 20 out of the 30 years I have been CEO and managing director of 2 bigger solar companies, making charge controllers and solar lamps for off-grid solar systems. So I saw very often a significant problem with the financing sector. The problem I see, the market we have in Africa, in Asia, is typically a market which need quite small companies. Companies with typically revenue of 100,000, maybe of 500,000, and the bigger ones, maybe €1 million euros or US dollars, whatever you want. And the financing organizations typically are not able to provide loans or financing in general below 5 or 10 million US dollars. Since about 10 years, I also involved in projects for local manufacturing and local assembly. So when I was CEO in Focus, I set up a factory in Bolivia. People said at that time, hey, you are crazy. Bolivia, they produce cocaine, but not electronics. But finally it worked out. We have now 100 jobs in Bolivia, and the company make nice profit, and they are clear market leader in Latin America. Now I'm very proud my daughter is stepping into my footsteps, and she also try with her company some local manufacturings in Africa. Typically, she would need $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 in the country to finance the manufacturing there. But it's very hard to get it. If you want to have 5 million and you fulfill the conditions, you can get it. But if you put a too high amount of money on a small organization, you kill everything. You even can kill a country with 2 big projects. I want to remember on the project in Morocco, where we had more than 20 solar companies, few 100,000 revenue a year, and with a 100 million project, after the project, there is not a single company there which has survived. So it cannot be the target of international financing to destroy the local sector. Manufacturing is needed in Africa. We will not develop Africa by just selling stuff to them, also not by supply electricity to Africa. We will develop Africa by creating jobs. We will develop Africa by creating a part of the value chain there. And therefore we need adapted small amounts of money. So how can we get that? Sorry for speaking so long.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then I think we take one more question here in front, and then we come back to you in the next round.
Thank you very much. Khalid Ben Amou, I'm the Managing Director of the Sahara Wind Project. We are active in Morocco and Mauritania. And bouncing back on the previous question is, do you have any facility to help support the adaptation of technology to access renewable energies? In other words, pilot projects designed to engage, for instance, mine processing companies to be able to scale up then renewable energy projects. So that will be my question.
Thank you. Who would like to answer? I think the first question, Eugene, was also to you, and then on the question of financing, and the last question, we see who wants to react on this. Okay. Fine. Yeah.
With respect to Myanmar, I think yes, REP is geographically focused on Africa. We do have other facilities like the GREF. I think the best thing and I find the type of work you're doing interesting. GREF is providing equity. So if you're looking for equity, then GREF is investing in funds that are active in Asia, in Southeast Asia. And therefore, I think I can put you together to contact with the GRF team, and they can inform you as to which fund managers are already investing in your region to see if they might find interest in your projects. The question on ESCOs is absolutely true. It's a problem, especially because they can't get local financing either, because many of these companies don't have a long-term track record. So they're maybe in the beginning stages of a business. Often they come across terrible problems with getting enough working capital. And I think that these issues, I think, are very important for smaller scale. If you really want to go out and support the companies that do installation of small scale renewables and rural electrification, I think it has to be addressed. I'm not certain how Electrify sees to be able to address that. I think it could be done under Electrify as well. We certainly have looked at how it might be done within under REP, but I think maybe one of the areas where some kind of support is either via local banks, where we support the local bank to make the loans. Microfinance institutions might scale up to the very small, energy service companies to be able to finance them. Or perhaps some kind of an instrument which can be focused on financing working capital might help the early stages of of these companies to develop into full-fledged businesses, which then can access normal financing, local financing. And then the last one was about pilot projects. I think the EIB doesn't finance particular pilot projects. We finance commercially viable ones. Some of them may be pilots. And so I think we look at projects, and in the case of you're doing industrial customers, they will be probably large enough for the EIB to look at directly as an investment. And of course, if the off-taking company is providing the guarantee for the then I think there's a certain dialogue that can certainly go ahead, and the best thing is you would put you in contact with the loan officers in charge of the country.
Thanks. I think that answered your questions, and then we have some more minutes which we should use in order to give you once again the opportunity to ask. So we have 1, 2, there's one more question, and then in the back.
Sorry, Mike Radwick from Rift Energy again. A question for Mark. It's a general one, but probably quite key because the devil's in the detail always. A subordinated debt facility or convertible grant is a great idea. What sort of guarantee mechanism are you thinking for securing a convertible grant at some point?
Next question, please.
Thank you. My name is Fabi Tumiwa. I'm from Indonesia. My question is, I haven't heard about the process, the overall process of this Electrify from the start until the closing of the financial. For instance, how do you source the project? How do you find a good project to be financed? It's not so clear from today's explanation. Perhaps the whole process from start until the financial closing can be explained in a more direct way. Second is that I read in the paper the investment criteria, and most of this investment criteria is investment criteria. But again, we are dealing here with the rural electrification project, and I wonder if you have a concern related to social and environmental aspect of this rural electrification project, and in what stage you actually will apply this kind of social and environmental criteria, if any, and how does this criteria will determine the project feasibility. Thank you.
We had one more question here in front, and then there was another one there in the back, and then we have to have the next round.
Thank you. Matteo Della Volta from Siemens. I had a question that it's the extension maybe of a question that just came. We talked about DFIs a lot, and thanks also to the presence of Mr. Rixen here. I would like to know if where do you panelists see the role of DFIs in this new initiative? If there are any plans already, conceptions, I don't know, ideas about the role of DFIs. This center of excellence has been mentioned several times, and you are all experts in some of the specific areas, so putting you together will already build a center of excellence that would be necessary for this initiative. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, Fabio De Pascale of Divergy. We do microgrids in Tanzania. The reason, this is not really a question, it's more like speaking out for a maybe not overly represented part of the audience here. We are a very, very small and relatively innovative microgrids company. We found a way to serve rural communities providing things like 5 watts, 10 watts per household. We've been invited here, we're very glad of that. But then we hear people about talking about a project of 50 megawatts. And we think, whoa, this is something that is just not useful for us. We are not in the same room almost. And then we also read the Electrify proposal, the draft, and we read this is really aimed at very early stage companies, is very early stage projects. Now we put together a pilot with friends and family. We then scramble for 2 years. We go through social investors to try to put together a few $1 million to grow up to a few tens of thousands of connections. The draft specifies that the point is addressing the shortage of equity. We find equity that finds us too late because they only want to do early stage companies. Others, they say we are too early because they only want to invest into profitable companies. Senior debt will not even look at non-profitable companies, given that we are very innovative and doing things that are very atypical, yet working and yet according to plan. I think of all the things that we saw in the draft, the thing that worries us the most is the LOI from senior debt. Maybe our input would be at least make sure that Electrify could come in with an LOI from Electrify so that could unlock the LOI from the senior debt. It sounds a very funny catch-22, but maybe working. I think this is an input which is important and hopefully will be received because there is more than just my own company. There is a few other players in the sector. They are actually coming up with results which are quite remarkable and faster and quicker and giving better connection rates than the vast majority of the large projects that we've been looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to pass the floor to Mark, to you. I think the first 2 questions especially were addressed to you, and then Jan can say a word on the third one.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't understand the question on the guarantee of the convertible grant. The facility is there to make applications for convertible grants. And then I address immediately the last speaker as well. It is the Electrify and the manager that needs to secure that there will be senior debt. And obviously the developer is part of that process, but the platform is at a very early stage. Well, a platform is not even a platform, it's a facility. Is at a very early stage. You receive the draft, and it's meant to be functioning in a way that the senior debt is linked to it. So at a certain stage, when it will be launched, the puzzle of having access to senior debt will be incorporated into that facility. And that's only meant there, the letter of interest from senior debt, to make sure that this facility makes no sense if in the end, and there may be 5 years in between or 10 years in between, if there is no access to senior debt. So it should be incorporated, it should be, and that's the duty of the manager, together with the steering committee from the European Commission, but it's the duty of the manager to ensure that there's a full debt package. And the convertible grant, as part of that whole stuff, will be made available a bit earlier. But it's, that LOI is only meant to do that. On a development, project development, then I address, I believe, the third question of the gentleman in the middle. Obviously, it's the developer that needs to come with a business plan. It's not the Electrify initiative that takes over business and propositions. It's an initiative that needs to come from an entrepreneur to Electrify, and Electrify is aiming at maximum support, but not more than that. It's maximum support. It's helping with maybe drafting, finalizing the business plan, making a model available, etc. And yes, that question will be answered by Jan on behalf of EDFI. The question from the gentleman from Siemens. But everything we'll do is fitting any environmental social scheme, KYC, corporate governance scheme. You can imagine that is applicable in financings in developing countries. Everything we do sticks to adhering to performance standards of the IFC, etc. So that will be incorporated in the role of the manager of that facility.
It is correct that the projects which will be funded by Electrify are fairly small and much smaller than projects usually financed by the EDFI members. In the case of Electrify, there would be the Center of Excellence which will procure the projects, probably through call for proposals. The Center of Excellence will appraise the projects, will structure the financing, will do the KYC, the know your customer, the due diligence, the environmental and social checks, and will then present the proposal to one of the EDFI members and ask them to finance this already completed package. There will be a very close cooperation between the EDFI members and Electrify, and Electrify is expected to undertake all these processes which are considered too costly for EDFI members to do for projects of this size. So I believe that EDFI members will be willing to downscale the size of projects once Electrify is up and running.
Thanks, Jan. Now we have already passed the closing, which was supposed to be at 11 o'clock. So what I would propose is that we continue the exchange and also the discussion on specific details or questions you might still have during the coffee break now. Certainly the panelists will still be available for you. I'd like to thank you very much for attending this session. I think we had quite an interesting exchange on different possibilities how this initiative can be brought forward. And we hope, of course, to continue the discussion with you now, also informally during the coffee break. Thanks very much for attending.